And so one exercise that a lot of our clients have been going through all over the world is reviewing all of their contracts for the supply of energy and critical materials. Because what you're looking to establish is what's the impact on the contractual obligations if there is suddenly a tariff imposed, which might double the cost of the material to the importer. So does that mean that you can terminate the supply of the contract, what they call a force majeure clause, so you can suspend the supply until such time as the situation is more regularized. And then again, in M&A transactions, Anya, if a deal was already agreed, does it still have to go through if the economics of the transaction are hugely distorted by, for example, tariffs or export controls? So there's a lot of planning that suppliers of material have to go through. I think we're going to see a lot of consideration in contracts going forward as to how long people are willing to contract for in such an uncertain environment. And so, over many years, you've seen a lot of different pricing models, long-term offtake contracts to spot pricing models. At the moment, you would feel very nervous about going into a long-term fixed price contract in a situation where there's essentially a trade war going on between two of the biggest economic blocs in the world.
Yeah, that will be my next question. What are the most popular adjustments that currently are happening with the contracts that maybe you personally or your partners work on? And I guess, yeah, that would be the question. What would be the adjustments, and what has changed?
Well, the one that certainly isn't popular with us or indeed the parties is people terminating their contracts. But obviously that has been an issue. We have seen a number of situations where people have invoked force majeure or purported to terminate their contracts because the supply arrangements just don't make any sense in the current environment. And so, for example, you've seen, I already referred to MP Materials, the Mountain Pass rare earth project in the US. And so they have announced that they're not going to export material to be refined in China anymore. Now, the reasoning for that is pretty clear because obviously, under the current environment, the last thing they want to do is for the US taxpayer to subsidize the production of the mining of rare earths that will then be shipped to supply the Chinese processing plants. So that's probably the most extreme case where you see trading arrangements broken off completely. But I think, clearly in a lesser case, what you're going to be doing is trying to build more flexibility into your contracts to enable you to renegotiate the prices if there is some sort of unforeseen impact in terms of tariffs. And that's something that, makes a lot of sense to be looking at. The other thing you have to bear in mind is, do the markets still work under these circumstances? So there's been a lot of distortion of the traded prices for minerals where there is a spot market. And, this is something that has been going on for several years. There was a great nickel crisis in 2022 where the LME market essentially blew up and, the price increased by several 100% in a couple of days of trading. They had to shut down the market. Now, that led to some very high-profile litigation because obviously when the market was suspended and they had to unwind trades because the market had ceased to operate, many of the counterparties brought legal action. So all of these are kind of factors that now have to be considered when you're entering into supply contracts for these materials.
Any additional clauses that usually are not included in contracts like that now are considered?
Well, it's probably more clauses that we didn't think about so much that you now look at quite differently. So I think that force majeure, that is something that maybe people had become quite relaxed about, and it had a reasonably developed form. But now I think you have to consider a very new set of circumstances where you are essentially under trade war conditions. Now, typically, historically, force majeure was considered to exclude a situation like an increase in cost, so a purely economic effect. But can people afford to work to that? Maybe you have to have a different type of clause which will say if there is such a significant tariff imposed, that enables you to renegotiate the price or suspend supply until the situation reaches a landing. So I think you're right. What we can expect to see is, firstly, we're going to see a lot of litigation. So there's going to be some new law that comes out of it. But also we can probably expect to see some new refinements in the way that people draft contracts of this nature.